Hi everyone! Welcome to our AKIDS Symposium 2023. We are so glad to see you all here with us once again. Get ready for 2 incredible and fun-filled days packed with webinars that will be held today and in-person play dates tomorrow here at AKIDS. Today, we have a lineup of webinars led by our experts in the field of speech therapy, pediatrics, physiotherapy, child psychology, and occupational therapy. They'll be sharing topics tailored specifically to address some of the concerns and questions that parents like yourselves may have. Okay, let's give a warm welcome to our first speaker, Anabella. Here's a little introduction about her. She's our speech and language therapist here at AKIDS. Anabella has a wealth of experience working with children and youth with language disorders, social communication difficulties, literacy difficulties, and speech sound disorders. Apart from working with young ones, Anabella also extends her support to adults, helping them with speech and language difficulties, swallowing difficulties, and cognitive communication impairments. Today, Anabella will be sharing with us about speech therapy with a focus on the topic, why is my child not talking? Without further ado, let's have Anabella take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Ki. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so my name is Anabella and I'm a speech therapist. And today I'm very happy to be sharing about a topic that many parents have probably asked me about in my work as a speech therapist. So without further ado, I'll just jump right in. Okay, so this is what we're going to be talking about today. I'll be sharing some fact or fiction quizzes along the way, so do keep a lookout for them. And please also keep a lookout for the answers to these small little quizzes along the way. Okay. So when a child is not speaking, there can be quite a few reasons for why the child isn't speaking. And 2 possible reasons could be language difficulties or speech difficulties. Of course, there can be other reasons as well, like anxiety, which may lead to a child not speaking in certain situations that they feel uncomfortable in, or and then they only speak in situations where they feel comfortable in. And so, but before we can even reach a diagnosis of anxiety causing a child to clam up, we do need to rule out any difficulties in language or speech. And for language and speech, many of us perhaps don't even make the distinction between these 2 concepts. And to be honest, before I was a speech therapist, I also didn't make any distinction between these 2 concepts. But there is a difference. Okay, so let's talk about them. Language is actually a system of words we use to express an idea, while speech is how well we are able to articulate the sounds in words that we speak. Okay, so this cartoon actually further illustrates the difference. You can see here that there's a boy and he has written the word betray on the blackboard. And his teacher, so obviously he can he can spell and he can write. And now his teacher is asking him to use it in a sentence. And you can see that he has come up with a sentence, a beautiful sentence. Her face betrayed that she had farted in the ladies' room. Okay, so he has obviously used the word betray in a sentence. He is expressing an idea in his head. But you can see that he says farted instead of farted. So he changes the t sound in farted to a d sound in farted. So we can conclude he probably doesn't have a language difficulty, but he may have a speech difficulty. Okay, so hopefully this helps us understand what language is and what speech is a little better. And why this is important is because for a young child who isn't speaking, language difficulties may be at the forefront of why they may not be speaking. And that's because when you don't have when you have an idea in your head, but you don't have any language, you're not able to translate that idea into words. And you can imagine if a child doesn't have many words, it'll be difficult to analyze the child's speech because there won't be many, the child won't be speaking much to begin with. But of course, we can't just assume that all children who are not speaking have language difficulties and not a speech difficulty. It really is, every child is different, they may present differently. So it really is up to the speech therapist's clinical judgment when the child comes in for an assessment, whether to assess language first or speech first, and to determine what exactly is the issue underlying the child not speaking. Okay, so now that we know that probably, language may be one of the factors affecting why a child isn't speaking, we do want to know when we should be worried about a child having difficulties with language development. So we look at the research for when a child should develop language. Okay, so this chart here is a little wordy, but it shows when most children pick up certain skills. So there is skills from birth to 24 months old, and we have understanding and hearing on the left column and expression in the right column. So at birth to about 6 months, a child is only expected to be hearing, the different types of sounds in the environment. So a child may startle at a loud noise, and they may have a non-verbal response to changes in what they hear in the environment. So if mom has a change in tone of voice, maybe the baby may also express it non-verbally, perhaps by looking at mom or smiling at mom. And for a baby at 6 months old, they are cooing and babbling, making sounds when happy or upset. As they grow older and reach their first birthday, it's expected that they understand words for common items and people. So common items like food items, perhaps some animals, some body parts. But of course, we don't expect them to understand all of these food items or all body parts or all animals. It's just perhaps a few here and there. And of course, maybe mama and papa. And then also in terms of expression, they are using gestures. They are saying 1 or 2 words like maybe hi, bye, mama, dada. Or if they have a dog, then, the dog's name perhaps, or just dog. But of course, the sounds, because they're still really, really young, and because speech is quite a complex skill to master, so the speech sounds may not be that clear. As they reach 2 years of age, they are expected to understand more words and also expected to use a lot more new words and name pictures in books as well. Okay, so exactly how many new words should they be expected to say or understand? Okay, so the next 2 slides show charts from a research study done quite many years ago. And what they did in this study was they had a relatively large number of parents fill up a checklist of words that children understood and said. So these charts show the results of the study. And you can see at 18 months old, a child who is 18 months old, 50% of the children who were 18 months old understood around 60 words. Okay, and if we go to the next slide, we see that around 50% of children who were 18 months old used about 20 words. Okay, so we do have to take the results of this study. We have to be mindful about the results in this study because this study was done actually on children who are monolinguals. And in Singapore, we are mostly bilinguals. And so what that means is if we were a parent in this study filling out the same checklist, we do have to consider the words that our child says in the second language as well. So if a child has the word for drink, let's say, in Chinese, as in her, but not in English, we do need to count the word in Chinese as well. Yeah. Okay, so that being said, okay, so now we have a little quiz here. Okay, facts or fiction? Gestures are counted as words. Okay, so what does everyone think? If you remember, in the language milestone slide, there was at around 12 months old, a child may be actually using gestures as well. And if the child is using gestures in a specific and intentional manner, then the gesture is counted as a word. So for example, if our child is waving bye to a parent when the parent leaves, the child is using it very specifically to mean bye, and it's also using it only when someone is leaving. And so that's why it's counted as a word. But if the child is waving randomly because they are excited, then we don't really count them as a word. So gestures are counted as words. It's a fact. Okay. And then learning two languages causes a delay in picking up language. Okay, so fact or fiction? This is actually not true. When we learn two languages, there isn't a delay in picking up language, but we do learn the vocabulary in two different languages. So if we were to count the total vocabulary size, we just need to consider the vocabulary in both languages instead of only one language. So no, learning two languages doesn't cause a delay in picking up language. Okay. Okay, so now that we know when we should start getting worried about a child not developing language appropriately, we do want to also know what could be causing the delay in language development. Okay. So this pyramid shows how language, the foundational skills required for development of language. As you can see right at the bottom of the pyramid, we have the foundational skills of developing language. So we have pre-verbal and early interaction skills being right at the bottom. So these are the important skills that we do want our children to develop so that they can eventually develop language. And these skills are things like eye contact, turn-taking, pointing, cause and effect, symbolism, and joint attention. So I'll be going through a few of the more crucial ones, the more crucial pre-verbal skills. And then we have attention and listening and play as well before we develop an understanding of language and before we develop the use of language. Okay, so jumping right into pre-verbal skills, the first more important pre-verbal skill that we need to have is joint attention. So what is joint attention? It's actually the coordination of visual attention with another communication partner with the purpose of commenting. If you see in this picture here, a dad and his son, they are walking along, and the dad sees a bird, an interesting bird. So he points at the bird and he says to his son, "Look at that bird." And his son responds by turning in the same direction as well and looking at that bird. So the dad was actually initiating joint attention with his son. And why joint attention is important is because it helps children learn to communicate back and forth, imitate others, use gestures, and play in new ways. And what the evidence shows is that the frequency of children initiating joint attention is associated with improvements in language. Okay, and cause and effect is the next important pre-verbal skill. And why it's important is because when a child understands cause and effect, they are also likely to understand that their communication attempts can change their environment or result in a desired outcome. So, for example, if a child understands cause and effect, they know that if they call out for their mom or dad will likely respond to them and come to them. Versus if they don't understand cause and effect, they may not even try to communicate in that manner. Okay, and the next important pre-verbal skill is symbolism. So why symbolism is important is because language is symbolic and words are actually symbols for objects. So when we communicate, we're actually using symbols. We can communicate verbally by saying duck to refer to the animal that goes quack quack. We can also write the letters D-U-C-K to refer to that same animal. And we can also communicate non-verbally by flapping our arms to mean duck. Okay, so moving on, the other important skill is also attention and listening. And being able to wait, to attend and listen to input, for example, verbally spoken words from a child's surroundings, enables them to actually hear the words that are being said when mom or dad is playing with the child. And then also the child will be able to then learn from that experience. Versus a child who is not attending or listening, then it will be difficult for that child to actually pick up what he hears in the surroundings. Okay, and then play. Play is also a skill that children pick up naturally as they grow up. So there are actually many skills, many play skills and there are actually many different types of play, but the one that is important for development of language is actually pretend play. And why pretend play is important is because it teaches a child symbolism. When we play pretend, we are actually using a toy or another object to symbolize something else. So if a child picks up a twig and uses it as a magic wand, they are definitely playing pretend. Okay, and so pre-verbal and early interaction skills, attention and listening and play, they form the foundation of the development of language. And if all these skills are in place, we do expect a child to then to develop an understanding of language. And before they can talk, they do need an understanding of language. And as you can see, speech sounds, they are right at the tip of this pyramid. And that's because we do want children to develop language and to be talking first before we actually are concerned about their speech sounds. Okay, so now that we know what skills are needed to develop language, what then could cause these skills to break down? Okay, so I'm going to list some factors that contribute to differences or a delay in language development. So the first one is developmental conditions. The second is the environment. And the third is hearing. Okay, so let's look at each one of them. Okay, for developmental conditions, some examples of developmental conditions are autism, attention deficit hyperactive disorder or ADHD, and developmental language disorder. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There are many other developmental conditions, but individuals with these conditions are neurodiverse, which just means that their brains may be wired a little differently from the rest of neurotypicals. So development of pre-verbal skills or understanding of language may appear different from neurotypicals. For example, it may develop later or in a different manner. And so because the pre-verbal skills don't develop at the same time as neurotypicals, so development of verbal language may be later for these for children who are neurodiverse. That being said, it doesn't mean that they cannot develop language. It just means that we perhaps have to help them in a different way. Okay, so the second factor that could contribute to a delay in picking up language is the environment. So in the environment, sometimes we, as parents, we do expose our children to screen time. And sometimes life is just really busy and we need to get things done. We need to shower, we need to get the house in order, and we can't have we need to entertain our children at the same time. And so some parents we resort to screen time to keep them occupied while we get the house in order. But excessive screen time can actually affect many areas of development. And one area it does affect is the development of attention. So how this may manifest when a child plays is the child may actually be jumping from one toy to another. They may not be fully engaging with the toy, or they may get bored quickly of that toy. And so they don't really learn fully from that experience with one toy. Before we can even say much about that toy, they are off to find the next toy. So that's how screen time can actually affect attention. Of course, this is just one example. Screen time can also affect attention in other ways as well. Okay. And of course, in the environment, we have language stimulation. So being exposed to language helps children understand and learn language. Just like how if we are not exposed to French, we are not able to understand or learn that language simply because our brains will not be wired to, without the exposure to French, our brains will not be wired to understand the language at all. So similarly, for a child who doesn't hear language much, their brains are just not going to be wired to develop language appropriately. Okay, and the third one, hearing difficulties. So in Singapore, parents have a choice of letting their newborn go through a newborn hearing screen right at birth. And even if our child is cleared of any hearing issues at birth, as they grow up, if they fall ill, hearing issues may actually arise from ear infections. And for some children with developmental or congenital conditions like cleft palate, they may be more susceptible to hearing difficulties. And when hearing is affected, of course, we are not able to hear as much language, so language input is affected as well. And when language input is affected, we don't hear as much language, then the development of language may be delayed. Okay, so another fact or fiction quiz. If my child is not talking by 18 months, he or she is autistic. Okay, so fact or fiction? Okay, so for a child who is not talking by 18 months, as you can see, there can be many different types of reasons. And it's not necessarily that the child is autistic. So the answer to this is fiction. Okay, so now that we have heard some conditions, some different types of conditions and different skills that can be affected when a child is not speaking, we also acknowledge that the picture is often not so clear cut. It's not that a child is 100% not speaking or 100% speaking all the time. Sometimes a child may be speaking, but what they say may not make sense entirely to us. And one of these scenarios is perhaps the child is speaking but echoing what he or she has heard previously. So in other words, delayed echolalia. So this is quite an interesting one. For children who are exhibiting delayed echolalia, they may actually be processing language in a different manner. So for example, if you see in this comic here, what most of us perhaps know about language development is the analytic processing, in the analytic processing manner. So you can see the girl says park. And so in the first picture, the girl says park, it's a single word. So language develops from single words to two-word phrases. For example, play park, and then a sentence, let's go to the park. So it's a very bottom-up way of processing language. Whereas for children who are using delayed echolalia to communicate, they may actually be processing language in a Gestalt manner. So you can see, so what Gestalt language processing means is that they are processing language from the top down. They're actually using sentences that they have heard in a different scenario to communicate what they mean. So you can see in the first picture under Gestalt, that says, oh, time for school. And the boy responds, let's get ready to rumble. So what he probably means, he probably has heard this somewhere else, and he's using it to mean, okay, probably let's go, or I'm ready to go. you can see he's carrying his bag all ready to go. But as they are exposed to a different kind of language model, so for these children, we do want to expose them to sentences that can be easily broken down. And when they are exposed to these types of language models, they do develop language, and they do end up also speaking in sentences that will make more sense to their parents. So for example, in the last picture, you can see he goes, "Let's get going to the park," which probably most of us may understand. So for these children, we do, as parents or as teachers working with these children, we do need to get curious about why they are echoing certain sentences and not others, because they are communicating. It's just that they're using these sentences, and there is an intention behind these sentences that we need to figure out so that we can understand them better and so that we can model appropriate sentences for them to pick up. Okay. And then in another scenario, perhaps the child is using some gestures and is making some sounds. So the child is not 100% quiet all the time. They're actually making some sounds. Okay, so what do we do in this scenario? Do we give it time? Okay, so as we know in the earlier slides, gestures and fun sounds, they are actually considered words. And for some children, gesturing and fun sounds could mean that they may start saying more words if they are exposed to language. And as we all know, children develop at all sorts of different paces. And for some children, it's not that there's anything intrinsically wrong or anything that we need to, any underlying condition, any underlying developmental condition. It's just that they may develop language a little later. And what is heartening is that research shows early use of vocabulary doesn't predict persistent language difficulties later in life. So for these children who are just normal variations of language, of how language develops, for these children who develop language just a little later, but there's no underlying developmental condition, we can let them take their time to actually develop language. But of course, if we are really giving it time and they're still not progressing, not developing language, then we do want to get curious about whether there are any difficulties also with the speech sound system. Perhaps speech, they may be actually trying to say a word, but speech looks really effortful for them, or they are using gestures more and more to express themselves because they are just not able to get the word out sometimes. So we do need to get curious also about why a child may not be speaking, even if we give it time. So as you can see, it can be quite tricky figuring out why a child isn't speaking. And if as a parent, we feel that we are very concerned and we feel that there is something wrong, we do need to probably seek the advice of a doctor, a pediatrician, or go to a speech therapist to find out exactly why a child may not be speaking. Okay. Okay, so I have come to the end of my sharing. And if there are any questions, we can also raise them up at this point.
All right. Thank you so much, Anabella, for that wonderful presentation. And I think we have two questions here. The first question for you would be, how will speech therapy help my child to speak?
Okay, so in speech therapy, firstly, we will do an assessment to figure out if there are any difficulties, with any pre-verbal skills, any difficulties with play skills or attention and listening. And of course, as a speech therapist, we don't deal with all of these difficulties. Our colleagues, the occupational therapists, also have a role to play in developing play skills for children who are not developing play skills appropriately. But as a speech therapist, we then look into the pre-verbal skills and we try and develop the pre-verbal skills if the child is not showing that, not exhibiting a grasp of those skills. And of course, because these children are still really, really young, they spend most of the time with parents. We do want parents to come in as well so that we can get information from parents and so that we can also work with parents. So a lot of times what I do is I do parent coaching. So I get parents to come in, we will have a session together. I'll share some language stimulation strategies with them so that they can take these home and work on the strategies with their child at home as well. So of course, it's not going to be, speech therapy is not, it's not magic. We're not going to be seeing a child suddenly start to speak after one session, but it is a journey that we take together and we troubleshoot difficulties as we go along with parents. Yeah.
All right, and the second question would be, what should parents expect during a typical speech therapy session?
Okay, so during a typical session, when you come in, we will be doing an assessment at the very, very first session. So typically what I'll do is I'll get some information from parents, and then I'll have parents play with their child so that I can observe how the play goes on at home, and so that and because children are most familiar with their parents, I'm still a stranger to them. So I'll get to see how much what a child can do when they're playing with a familiar adult like their parents. And then I'll also start to join in the play to build rapport with the child. And from this session, hopefully, I'll be able to have some information about what the child can do and some guesses about what the child is having difficulties with. Of course, because many times it's just the first session, and for children who are having language difficulties, sometimes they may be really reserved and shy. So the rapport building has to be there at the start so that in the following sessions, hopefully then they will start to open up a bit more, and so I can see their real abilities come true in the following sessions. So assessment, probably, we get the bulk of information in the first session, but of course I'm refining what I know about the child as we go along as well. And in the subsequent sessions, then we are able to, of course, at the first session, we do already offer some strategies. And then in the subsequent sessions, we troubleshoot them together. We offer even more strategies as we go along, depending on what problems the parent may be facing or how we can push the child to the next step if the child is, let's say, doing well with the strategies.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that we have, and thank you so much, Anabella, for answering those questions. And we have come to the end of our first speaker. So once again, thank you so much, Anabella, for sharing your insights and also offering different scenarios to the various types of speech development in our children. And yeah, thank you so much again for your time.